And Vice President Kamala Harris briefly while on a tarmac in Michigan making her first comments about the recently confirmed debate between her and former President Trump. NTD's Jason Blair has more.
On Thursday, before boarding a plane in Michigan, Vice President Kamala Harris stopped to take a few questions from reporters. She was asked about her scheduled September 10th debate with former President Trump.
I'm looking forward to it and hope he shows up.
And when asked about being open to additional debates,
I am happy to have that conversation about an additional debate for after September 10th.
Harris has yet to do any formal interviews or press conferences since President Biden dropped out of the race.
Why does she refuse to answer questions from the media?
However, Harris also said on Thursday she plans to schedule a formal interview by the end of the month. Harris and Minnesota Governor Tim Walz also launched an ad campaign in English and Spanish targeting Latino voters on Wednesday. And on Friday, the political arm of the League of United Latin American Citizens, which is the USA's oldest and largest Latino civil rights organization, announced their endorsement of Harris. They said that this is their first ever presidential endorsement. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
And former President Trump today making a campaign stop in Montana this evening. This as he seeks to help Republicans secure one of the most competitive Senate seats in the country. The former president is backing ex-Navy SEAL Tim Sheehy, who's aiming to win over three-term incumbent Democrat Jon Tester. Here's Trump talking about his travel plans at his Mar-a-Lago residence yesterday.
I'm going out to certain places to help certain senators get elected. When I go out to Wyoming or when I go out to Montana, or I'm going to different places to help people.
And during the press conference, Trump talked about the state of the U.S. economy under his administration. He's also emphasized his no tax on tips plan, which he announced during a campaign rally back in June.
We had just about no inflation, but I had a very minor, I actually had a positive inflation. I had a perfect number right around the 1% number. It was perfect. And to show you, it stayed there for 2 years. I will be saving Social Security, and I'm going to work it out that there's no tax on Social Security for seniors. I'm also doing no tax on tips.
Thursday's press conference came as both Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris agreed to debate on ABC in September. The former president has proposed 3 debates, ABC, Fox, and NBC, but the Harris campaign has yet to only agree to the single one on ABC thus far.
So I just look forward to these debates. I think it's very important that we have them. I hope she agrees to them September 4th, September 10th, September 25th. And I think they'll be very revealing. Do you have any questions?
Aside from domestic politics, Trump has also spoke out about communist China's unfair trade practices, an issue that remained front and center during his previous campaigns.
Cannot have it where China is taking advantage of the United States, and that's what they were doing, as you very well know.
And during his tenure as president, Trump took a litany of action targeting China's trade violations, including a sweeping round of tariffs on hundreds of billions of dollars worth of Chinese goods. And in the wake of the global COVID-19 outbreak, Trump repeatedly criticized the Chinese regime for its handling of the virus. During a United Nations address, he accused Beijing of failing to stop the spread of COVID by allowing international flights to leave China. Trump says the communist regime also falsely stated that there was no evidence of human-to-human transmission. And special counsel Jack Smith is seeking to delay Trump's January 6th related trial. The Supreme Court's ruling on presidential immunity seems to be causing prosecutors to reconsider how they proceed. Special counsel Jack Smith's office asked the court to extend the deadline for the next status report to the end of August. The prosecution stated in its filing that the defense did not object to the request for a delay. Judge Chutkan said Trump is not required to attend the hearing that is scheduled for next Friday. It would be the first time the case is back in court since the Supreme Court immunity ruling. A delay would push any activity in the case into September at the earliest, just months before the presidential election. And at least 14 people are dead today and 44 others injured from a Russian strike on a shopping mall in the town of eastern Donetsk. That's according to Ukrainian officials. This comes on the heels of Ukraine's surprise attack on Russia's Kursk region. Russia is now reportedly declaring a federal-level emergency and sending reinforcements. Joining me now to discuss the state of war in Ukraine is John Sitlides, geopolitical strategist at Trilogy Advisors and senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. John, thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be with you, Steve. Thank you.
It's great to have you, John. John, so if you could sort of break it down for us, how has Ukraine's recent unexpected incursion into Russia affected the balance of power, if you will, and the territorial control in the ongoing conflict?
Keep in mind, first of all, this is just 4 days old. It's very early to tell what the long-term impacts, if any, are going to be. And I would say initially the strategic importance of this incursion, or one might more accurately say the first invasion of Russian territory since World War II, is not going to be significant in and of itself unless somehow Ukrainian armed forces are better able to break into Russian territory more deeply, perhaps take over a major gas metering station that connects the Russian pipelines through Ukraine into Europe, which of course could wreak havoc on European energy supplies going into the winter, the end of this year. And potentially the prize could be the Kursk nuclear power plant, which I think the Ukrainian forces might look to overtake in order to gain as much leverage as possible in a possible upcoming peace summit, perhaps the end of this year, or any negotiations with Russia in the months ahead.
That was going to be my next question for you, John, is how might these developments sort of influence future negotiations with Russia and ultimately the overall trajectory of the conflict?
It's going to be the critical issue going forward, I think, Steve, because it seems from right now, again, the last 3 or 4 days, and this is still very early, we're in the fog of war, there's major propaganda pushes coming out of both Moscow and Kyiv on this operation or this incursion. But it seems that the Ukrainian armed forces from President Zelensky on down made a decision to move armaments and fresh recruits, fresh soldiers, over into this area, this soft, vulnerable area along the Russian-Ukrainian border, rather than hold up critical defenses in eastern Ukraine, where Russia is expected to be making major advances in the next several weeks, potentially into the fall. So it seems that the priority right now is to strengthen Ukraine's hand as much as possible, again, at a peace summit, or more importantly, because I doubt a summit will be the negotiating platform, whatever negotiations Russia and Ukraine decide to enter into, especially with, I think, increased American and European pressure on Zelensky to find some type of a negotiated settlement here. So I think it's going to be critical. The question is going to be, can Russia attack massively enough with reinforcements over the next several days to push Ukrainian forces back over the border? Or can Ukraine successfully dig in, hold territory, and gain more leverage in any upcoming negotiations?
John, what are you hearing when it comes to the resolve and the morale of both Russia and Ukraine, but more so Ukraine, seeing how they have taken more of the brunt of the impact of the war thus far? And how could the outcome of the U.S. presidential election affect the conflict?
The morale issue is critical, more so on the Ukrainian side, at least to date, than on the Russian side, although this could be a humiliating slap in the face to Putin. And we'll see, again, if this is an enduring incursion into Russian territory, it could weaken Putin's standing in terms of delivering stability, security, and geopolitical resurgence to the Russian people. But we know that the Ukrainian armed forces are suffering from a very, very sort of rapidly declining morale. Again, keep in mind that the Ukrainian people and armed forces have been suffering under 2.5 years of profound and brutal attritional warfare. Russia has a much larger army, much greater armed forces, and is able to produce artillery shells, rockets, and missiles far faster than Ukraine is able to procure them from the U.S. and from NATO. And our understanding is that many of the recent recruits are terrified of being sent to Donbass and eastern Ukraine, what they call the quote-unquote meat grinder of that particular part of Ukrainian territory right now. So this could also be a shot in the arm for Ukraine short term, depending on how much they can continue to humiliate Russia. So I think in many ways this is more symbolic than strategic or substantive in terms of military gains. What happens with the U.S. presidential election, Steve? I don't really see much influence from the Ukrainian battlefield on the elections, but certainly whether Donald Trump wins or Kamala Harris wins, I think will portend very different outcomes for the war.
John Sitlides, really appreciate your perspective on this. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.